Hey everybody, TacticAngel, back on the PlayStation 5 for another ship review in World of Warships Legends. Today we'll be talking about the San Diego. For this review, we'll start with some analysis, talk about commanders, look over the stats, and then go into some gameplay. If you'd like to learn about the storied history of the San Diego, one of the most highly decorated ships in US Navy history, there's a link to the 10-minute video I put out on this last week in the description, as well as the normal time codes. So today we'll be talking about San Diego just in-game. San Diego is part of a very short list of Tier 7 American Premium Light Cruisers, and it's a very, very light cruiser in any real sense. She is the third Atlanta that we have in-game, so it's probably not a surprise to hear this described as something like a roided-out destroyer with a citadel. And she's completely unlike other American light cruisers you can play thanks to the different ammo selection. Still, being up a tier means that she's more expensive, and if this is news to you, I'm sorry, but higher tier doesn't always mean more fun. San Diego is up against some pretty steep competition, so what is she good at? One of the nice things about San Diego is that you could theoretically cruise around through the entire game just on SAP. It's exactly what the Atlanta does, just with HE. It's exceptionally capable of taking advantage of out-of-position destroyers and suffers none of the penetration fall-off, like AP, when shooting at distant superstructures, and that can make for some pretty consistent damage, even if you'll never get any fires with it. It may be a bit more difficult to hit distinct parts of ships from range, but the overall experience I've had with this isn't as profoundly silly as throwing a bunch of extra range on Flint and thinking that you might actually be able to hit something after 22-second flight time. San Diego's ballistics are considerably better. And I know it was frequently questioned in the Wargaming stream, but this ship does actually come with the historic 1944 camo, the one you see on the screen, not just this Lady Liberty stuff, rather the camouflage that she wore in the thick of the action. Now that I've listed its historic camouflage as a bonus might indicate that this ship doesn't have a lot going for it in game. That's at least partly true. Mostly, this ship is the World of Warships equivalent of the old freedom-loving Arnold Schwarzenegger at the end of 1987's classic Predator.
Come on. Do it! Do it! I'm here! Kill me!
A capable fighter with low HP, laughable armor, and an above-water citadel. Doesn't take a whole heck of a lot to knock you out of the game in this ship. If you're new here, this might be one of those curiously charming underestimations I might be known for. San Diego is definitely harder to play, tier for tier, than Atlanta. Your compensation for going up a tier is 400 hit points, SAP, which is a questionable benefit, and you'll lose radar in favor of 2 heals. Whether or not that trade is really worth the effort is a real question, but I would probably quietly and very strongly push most players towards probably not. Long and short of it is SAP is useful at the angles where you might auto bounce with AP but don't bounce with SAP, or against targets where you'd be likely to overpen. Situated at tier 7, SAP is a pretty reliable pen, at least of a sort, but not a great advantage with 127mm guns. Against easy to hit broadside targets where you might score full pens with AP, it's actually a potential drawback to go into this ship with that mindset. All this said, I've played dozens of games in this ship, and I rather like it. I attribute most of my losses to my team, but then again, who doesn't? Even so, I'm forced to admit that this ship is hard to play. The sensible break-even point in terms of win rate seems to be well north of 70%, and at that point, I can hardly estimate how good you must be in order to make this ship work consistently. That puts it more into the ranks of a collector's item, either for those who hold the ship in great esteem due to its place in US naval history, or because they just happen to live in San Diego. When we come to commanders, your standard cruiser choice is probably Norman Scott. For most ships, his abilities to reach out to longer ranges, get improved penetration, improved accuracy, and boost fire chance is usually useful. On San Diego, due to your different shell types, not so much. But shooting things at extremely long range is not a really effective way of spending your time, and anything dealing with HE is totally useless on this ship. Extra penetration, better accuracy, and fast reloads can work here, but for a Scot it might be more advisable to use the Highland way. The other cruiser commander you have here is Thomas Kincaid. His strengths are mostly in terms of utility and mobility. There are a lot of skills here that are going to reduce your damage taken and keep your guns and modules in the game longer, and they're actually individually quite vulnerable, though San Diego has enough turrets that having one or two disabled isn't all that crippling. And Kincaid offers the best options for improving your somewhat lackluster speed and maneuverability. Being extra dodgy is a decent way of staying in the game, but you'll prefer the comfort of an island rather than the infinite rudder shift and hoping against hope that you can dodge every last shot that is intended to hit you. Ordinarily, this sort of deal eats into your effectiveness as an American light cruiser, but since you have SAP, not so much. The only real downside is probably that in spite of all of this, San Diego still isn't really all that survivable. The base commander for the US Navy is George Dewey, and true to his historic roots, he might be something of a rock star here. Because you have access to destroyer skills, you might actually have some advantage in terms of speed, rudder shift, and concealment. The concealment bit might be the most important part, because with almost no hit points, the best way to ensure your survivability is not to get shot unnecessarily. The extra speed and maneuverability give San Diego some useful get up and go potential, and even if arguments against this might more or less boil down to why would you ever use a base commander, answer is because sometimes they're pretty good. And to the accusation, you realize there are no real offensive abilities here, that's true, but with SAP you don't really need them. As we jump into stats, San Diego is quite a different type of ship than most, and we'll do our best to sort out how she fits into Tier 7, though Atlanta and Atlanta Black are Tier 6, we'll probably make reference to them from time to time, since a lot of people may have one of those ships or maybe looking to get one. First, with survivability, we've got 27,900 hit points. That's a little more than the Harbin, which would make it the next to least healthy cruiser at the tier. But when considering this, please remember that the Harbin comes with a smoke screen and has arguably better protection. This is going to come up later. The game lists your armor as 6 to 89 millimeters of armor, which is basically nothing for a cruiser. Looking at the armor, 6 millimeters is your superstructure. Your whole hull, other than the orange part, is 16 millimeters, which is useful because it can bounce 8-inch guns, but nothing larger. Every battleship, and that does mean every battleship, even the German ones with itty-bitty guns, will punch right through this. That orange part is your citadel. Overall, it's got a funny shape, but the bits beneath the water aren't typically what get you into trouble so much as the shells that ignore your bow and smack straight into the 89mm front plate. Then I'll point you back to the 27,900 hit points that you started with, leave you to do the math about exactly how many shells that might take, and then maybe quietly mutter something about the lack of torpedo protection on the screen, which is a rarity among cruisers and also won't help. As the first block Atlanta, San Diego comes with 3 super firing twin turrets fore and aft, plus 2 additional twin 5-inch wing turrets. Effectively, you can get 7 turrets on a lot of targets if you give up some of your sides, and 4 almost anywhere else. The fast-firing 5-inch guns range out to 15.3 kilometers. For those worried about the 20-second flight time when Flint fires at things at similar range, your ballistics are a little more under control. San Diego ends up firing a shell with a flight time of around 11.15 seconds at 15 kilometers versus the Flint's 16.25, firing at the same distance. So it's not as profoundly misguided to try to play this thing at max range, at least for those reasons, even if there are slightly fewer islands that are usable in San Diego versus Flint. Being just destroyer guns, these things reload every 5.5 seconds and whip around at a speedy 7.2 second turret rotation. For no particular reason, the gimmick that the San Diego has is semi-armor penetrating shells rather than HE shells, and then the typical 5-inch AP. This is kind of a questionable trade because what makes the Flint and the Atlanta good, or annoying, or good/annoying, what makes the Flint in Atlanta funny is setting everything on fire. That's not an option here. Instead, what you get here is a shell that you're actually going to have to be able to aim, which really does make playing it farther away a bit more of an RNG festival, with alternating salvos doing 400 or 4,000 damage. Nice thing about these is they penetrate 36 millimeters of armor, which means that all ships' superstructures, virtually all of the bows and sterns, most ship decks, and the upper belts you'll face in the game are easy to penetrate. It has even better penetration angles, and SAP does not lose penetration at range. It also won't over-penetrate destroyers. That is what it's good at. Why this is actually a bit of an odd trait is that AP is actually going to be a more consistent and better source of damage against several cruisers and battleships at ranges and angles where you know you're going to penetrate, but not over-penetrate. If you're going to play the San Diego well, I think you're going to have to work that flow chart into your head on a pretty consistent basis, because sticking to just SAP all the time is probably going to hurt you. And if that doesn't sound like something you want to do, then San Diego is likely a pretty frustrating ship. Unlike most American cruisers, San Diego does have torpedoes. You're unlikely to be able to use these aggressively given their pathetic 4.5 kilometer range. Their chief advantage is simply in existing, and that people know that they exist. Consider how you use these carefully, because if you fire them, there's not a lot that's going to hold back a German cruiser or battleship from running into your space, or ships prone to those sort of tactics. Some people might know that the role of the Atlanta-class cruisers quickly shifted from flotilla leaders towards AA cruisers at the beginning of the war, and several foreign sources refer to them as AA cruisers entirely. That said, Atlanta is a much more potent platform tier for tier than San Diego, even if the San Diego is marginally better at AA. With just a 75 rating, the San Diego is kind of a C+ student at tier 7, which is not helped at all by the 225 DPM being 20% below average. For folks that remember Atlanta and Flint being kind of beastly in the AA department, they're both a little bit less powerful overall, but quite a bit better when compared with their peers. If you had anywhere between normal amounts of cruiser hit points, maybe this would be okay, or okay enough to distract people from attacking you, but a seasoned carrier player can realize that you're a paper tiger, dropping you realizing that there isn't actually that much damage for them to take, and then punishing you based on your extremely low HP pool. For maneuverability, scooting around at 32.5 knots, it's not exactly impressive. It's fine enough, but you're starting to lag behind most of the crowd at tier 7 by a full knot. Your turning radius is very good, best in class, and your 7.3 second rudder shift is also pretty good for a cruiser. Overall, unless you're specifically trying to outrun anything, maneuverability is pretty decent in San Diego. Your concealment is also pretty good. If you have any consideration at all for being spotted, you can avoid detection by about 90% of other tier 7 cruisers. You are similarly protected by air, and due to your tiny guns, you have the best detectability of any cruiser while firing from smoke. Equally inconvenient and inexplicable is the exactly twice the range that the same guns mounted on a destroyer have when firing from smoke, so that's 5.2 rather than 2.6. It might not make a lot of sense, but at least it's halfway memorable. Last but not least is the consumables. You're a cruiser, so you come with your pretty average 5-second damage control that reloads every 60 seconds. After that, you have your choice between a repair party or DFAA. Your repair party may not look super special. 167 per second seems low, but that's actually slightly improved from your average 0.5% per second. You can either get 2 of these or 2 DFAA charges, which is nothing special. Unless you want to run with a carrier, this doesn't seem like a super great idea. Even if you do run with a carrier, your HP issues still may allow a carrier to run at you time and time again until you're dead, so I don't know. After that, you get a sonar. That sonar is pretty standard tier 7 American cruiser sonar. 2 charges, 3.1 on the torpedoes, 4.4 on the ships. Then you have something of a gimmick. This is the reload booster. And I haven't mentioned this yet because this is something of barely a reload booster. It increases your rate of fire by 33% rather than 50% that you find on basically every other reload booster in the game. That means that your 5.5 second reload is only 3.7, which is useful, but it's not as useful as you'd expect. And that it's barely noticeable is one reason I haven't talked about it yet, so probably not a huge selling point for this ship. Alright, now with all that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and jump into some gameplay. We're going to be on Sleeping Giant, and as we start this game off, we are in the middle of the map. We're going to go ahead and start to rotate out towards the west side. My first thought is using this island that we have right in the middle of the map is pretty useful in terms of ships that like to HE spam, ships that just like to spam in general, I guess, because we don't have HE at all. We have just the SAP. We've got that loaded up. You can see we've got one of our allies ramming the island and tossing a whole bunch of torpedoes into the middle. Probably not a terrible idea. He's probably doing something sensible. So as you can see, we are positioned right behind this middle section where the islands dip down, and we can predictably shoot over everything. Now, San Diego, I have to admit, is maybe not the most interesting of all ships to showcase in any sort of review, because what you're going to be doing is hopefully finding a place like this, settling down, and just farming a ton of damage. And that's not the most exciting gameplay to play. Some of this is going to talk a little bit more about what the San Diego is bad at, what it's good at, what it is strangely good at while being kind of bad. So we hear right there that the game has woken us up. Somebody was sighted on the horizon. We're going to hop into action. I don't think anybody's going into B, because if they were, something probably would have happened already. So I'm going to start moving out to defend A. Now you can see, because of our build, we can get a little bit above the posted speed limit for the San Diego, and 35 knots isn't exactly terrible for a tier 7 cruiser. It's not good, but it's, we're zipping about decent enough. Apply a little bit of rudder here. We're going to go ahead and start to set up, assuming that the Azuma is going to go into A eventually. We can see another dip in the island there, where we can kind of set up ourselves to shoot over the island and make some really uninteresting content. We start firing out at Wichita, CE. And you can see kind of immediately what I'm saying about the randomness of the amount of damage you do. We had a hit there that hit 2 or 3 times, and we didn't get any damage whatsoever. We get 1100 there. We get 3,000 there. It's very hard to kind of figure what you're going to get with SAP, and to some degree that's a little bit frustrating. I'm not sure exactly what it is. It may in fact be hitting different modules before you actually hit the actual ship, and since SAP basically explodes on contact, either doing damage or bouncing off if you're over 80 degrees, then sometimes you just don't do any damage. So in this case, there's nothing really to say here. We are just farming. Azuma's backing off. We continue to shoot out there. We've got all the way up to 33,000 damage already. And that's okay. Some of that damage is obviously recoverable from the different ships that we've actually hit. And at this point, we're going to move a little bit forward, thinking about what What do we want to do next? I would really hope that I could get into B at this point. It looks a little bit more likely that I'm going to be able to set up right here and just try as much as I possibly can to help our battleship that's in B and so far we've stuck entirely to SAP. You can see we get only 1 hit there, a bounce. You can see we get 7 hits there, very little damage. This is sort of the sadness of SAP, which is going to have me jumping around between several different targets for quite a bit of this game, because I need a target that's showing me at least 80% to guarantee a penetration. And even then, I could hit different things like the conning tower, I could hit turrets. I only penetrate 36 millimeters, and 36 millimeters is pretty good overall. But you know, if I've had a few drinks and I'm a little bit tipsy, you know, like, it's hard, man. It's hard. The Kansas being a thick boy, we get a little bit more ability to actually shoot him. And now, unfortunately, we've lost our battleship that was in A, so we don't have any spots. So this is all just, let's spam SAP and see what happens. We're up to 54,000 damage. It's not exactly bad, but it's a whole bunch of disinteresting content. But this is what the ship's all about. That sort of gameplay is what you want to have happen. Now, being spotted as I am right now, we are spotted by radar, not supremely great. And you can tell that we're already a little bit down because we've lost 4 ships to 1. And now I'm being shot at, which arguably also sucks. So, as we pass behind this island, we're going to go ahead and hit our damage control. We're going to start out immediately fixing our turret situation, and we're gonna try as much as we can to get into a good situation as far as facing off against several ships that are coming around at us. Now, this is not what you should be doing in a San Diego. If you have to do it, it could potentially work, but I don't want to have to face a Kansas at 2 kilometers. But what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to ram the island. I'm going to set up to fire a broadside of widespread torpedoes to make sure I don't miss him. And I'm going to go as broadside as I can because most of my ship, his shots will pass right through. We are immediately confronted with a problem because the Wichita doesn't work the same way. The Wichita I can bounce. It has 8-inch guns. And if I were bow onto it, I would be able to actually take a shot, deflect right or left off of my bow. And so I'm backing up and trying to, like, get into a position where I can exploit that as a bonus. Wichita is backing off, though. And you can see that we've got another battleship rolling up on us. Now, that ship is the New Jersey. New Jersey is... it is a ship. In any case, we again try to get ourselves as broadside as possible. We get overpenned like crazy when New Jersey shoots at us. We're shooting AP back at New Jersey because we do have the ability to probably cause pens against superstructure, which are a little bit more consistent, I found. And now Wichita is stuck dealing with even more torpedoes. We're up to 103,000 damage. Our fate is changing quite a bit here, based on some pretty questionable gameplay. And all of a sudden, it's everybody against one guy on the enemy team. So we had a really nice trade there. We traded, what, 7 ships? 7 ships for 0. I'm trying to play where our battleship here is going to go. I want to pass in front of him, but it's not exactly clear what he wants to do. It looks like he's turning into me, which is not great. So we get pushed around a little bit by our Iowa here. I'm going to go ahead and turn back into the base. And you'll see exactly why I prefer to run this with concealment. Because as we're in the middle of this, and as we spot out to our max range, we see the battleship over there, and we don't have to engage him. It's amazing, but you don't actually have to shoot every target that you can see. So Minnesota's going to get fired upon by other ships, and I'm going to sit peacefully in B as the giant destroyer that I am, and just go ahead and cap this base. And we're back to one of the things San Diego's potentially good at. I have almost no interest whatsoever in fighting in Minnesota. It is probably too far away for me to play the let's go totally broadside and see what happens game. And I'm gonna scoot myself towards A. You will notice I did not use the reload booster at all in this game. We came away with 103,420 damage, which is pretty good. And I will say this is one of the ships that I almost never use the reload booster because it really doesn't do all that much for you. It can be nice. You definitely do more damage over time. And usually, if I remember it, it's because I'm about to die. But that's it. That's it. So obviously we've sped that up just a little bit, and we managed to cap the base. And that brings us finally to our closing thoughts on San Diego. This ship has a laudable history, but in Legends it probably doesn't quite measure up quite as much. The Atlanta-class cruisers have always been something of a meme in World of Warships, with a lot of pew but not so much bang. Atlanta and Flint make all of their hay off of fire damage. With San Diego, you're offered a powerful tool, SAP, with 36mm of penetration. That's basically a reward for hitting anything that isn't belt, turret, or tower, and that's a fun trick if your shots land. You can absolutely murder destroyers, but you don't have radar to really exploit that. You do get heals, but you have a laughable amount of hit points. Then, for whatever reason, your AA just doesn't quite work. In a sense, San Diego is a good design for a premium ship. She balances risk and reward pretty well. She's not overpowered, and as far as I can tell, she doesn't suck either. And if anything, she may be just a bit underpowered. She should function well in the hands of people who know their ways around islands and oversized destroyers with citadels, and if you're trying to get her just for hometown or historic pride, I wouldn't blame you, even if the last few years haven't been so good on America's finest city. San Diego is currently locked behind a weird sort of open it before you buy it container system. I wouldn't throw $100 at it. If I saw it at the top of the queue, it's definitely worth one purchase. If it's anywhere in between, who knows? Who knows? In any case, those are my thoughts on San Diego. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.